Hi, we're going to pick up here and talk about dependent variables and how we measure those. Okay, in summary, these are the primary principles around dependent variables. They're operationally defined so that we can have valid and consistent assessment. We want to make sure that we can observe and measure our defined behaviors, all right? Because we have to measure them repeatedly across a variety of conditions so that we can see a functional relation between no intervention versus intervention. We use inter-observer agreement procedures to assess for consistency, and we want to ensure that those behaviors that we are seeking to impact are socially significant. Dependent variables are selected for their social significance, not because it allows for evaluation of a conceptual theory, but because it is perceived as important to the individual or for society. Okay, so let's review again. Rocking. Rocking is defined as the student moving from upright sitting position, right angle of torso to legs, to at least 20 degrees forward and returns to upright position. How can we measure this behavior? Let's start by discussing continuous measurement. Continuous measurement is good for clearly defined beginning and end. So if a behavior has a clear beginning and end, we can just mark a plus or a minus or just check off if the behavior occurs. It's not good, however, for high rates of behavior or behaviors of long duration. Event recording is also called number, percent, or rate. Frequency recording is how often a behavior occurs. It's not good if a behavior is continuous across the day or if it occurs only under certain conditions. So for engagement, would not be good for frequency behavior because it would have a long occurrence, or learning sight words or reading sight words because it only occurs under certain conditions. Accuracy recording is the number or percentage correct. So that would be good for acquisition of new behaviors. Duration recording is how long a behavior occurs from start to finish. You use that if the goal is to increase or decrease the duration of the behavior. Latency recording is how long until the behavior starts from the directions given. So you use this if the goal is to increase or decrease latency. And intensity and magnitude really would just be the amount of damage, a rating, or a measured outcome. Discontinuous measurements provide estimates. But if you can't really identify the beginning or the ending of the behavior, then a discontinuous measurement, such as interval recording, you can get an estimate of frequency. And time sample recording will give you additional estimates of both frequency and duration. You might conduct frequency recording in which each cycle counts as one episode of rocking in this case. Or you might conduct duration recording to be the amount of time that the youngster is engaged in the behavior of rocking. Which one you select will depend on which one will give you the valuable information and help you determine the effectiveness of your future intervention. Let's look at Taylor. Taylor is a 6-year-old girl with severe intellectual disabilities and paraplegia as a result of cerebral palsy. Although she was eligible for early intervention services and for preschool services, the delivery of those services was very sporadic due to family issues, loss of communication, and frequent moves, and only recently began receiving consistent programming. Taylor has developed a pronounced behavior of hand flapping. Her educational team, consisting of a school psychologist, her mother, her teachers, and other related service personnel, have all agreed that this behavior interferes severely with Taylor's learning. What should the team do now? A functional behavior analysis suggests the hand flapping is exhibited when Taylor is excited or is asked to perform a behavior she does not appear to want to do. It is also likely being used as a self-stimulation occurs at a high rate. Taylor can be observed flapping her hands during virtually every activity and time period of the day. The team has agreed on a definition of hand flapping as a target behavior, but now must decide how to best record the behavior. One team member suggested the frequency of the behavior could be counted. Another suggested that the duration be counted. Still another suggested that the behavior be measured using either a partial or whole interval recording procedure. The team must decide which procedure is most appropriate. They also have brainstormed interventions and have decided that response interruption, gently, physically stopping Taylor from hand flapping when she begins, and using differential reinforcement of incompatible behavior, praising Taylor enthusiastically for engaging in more developmentally appropriate behaviors, such as play, sorting, stringing beads, and helping prepare snacks, would be appropriate. This is a DRI procedure. Let's take a look at some event-based recording procedures. Frequency recording. When should it be used? When you want to simply count the number of occurrences of the target behavior within a specific time, or the length of the observation sessions are consistent. What will you record? Well, if length of time is consistent or constant, you only count and record the number of behaviors. However, if the recording times are different across sessions, you would have to record the time to convert that to rate. No calculation is needed. You just simply count the number of behaviors. Reading fluency, a 1-minute running record, is a frequency recording. You count how many words the student reads, and you divide that by 1 minute to get a rate of reading per minute, based on the amount of time the student read. Some special considerations is that the behaviors need to be a relatively short duration, easily observed and counted. They should occur often enough that changes can be detected, and the goal is to achieve 0 rates of the behavior. To collect your inter-observer agreement, you will divide the number of responses, or the frequency, of one observer by the number of responses or the frequency of another observer. We convert frequency information to rate when the number of observation sessions vary in length. Higher frequency behaviors are difficult to count over time. So you record the number of behaviors and the amount of time observed. You divide the number of responses by the length of the observation to get a rate, and that way you can compare data from session to session. This could be used for counting the number of student ticks, or if your session opportunities vary in length. This gives you an estimate of frequency. More information could be gleaned by looking at times of day and sessions to see if there's a pattern. Inter-observer agreement is calculated by taking the smaller number of responses by the larger number of responses. To estimate frequency, you can also collect whole interval recording. When would you do that? Well, if there is a degree of duration to your target behavior and your primary concern with events of at least the length of the interval. So the behavior would last during the entire interval. You record behavior occurring during each of your intervals that are broken into small units of time. So over 10 minutes, you might have 20 30-second intervals. Then you calculate the number of pluses or occurrences, and you divide that by the number of intervals and multiply by 100. A student with stereotypic behaviors, such as rocking, that interferes with other activities would be an example. Short episodes of rocking are fine, but long ones interfere. So short ones would not be evident in a whole interval recording because they didn't happen throughout the entire interval. Partial interval recording is another option to estimate frequency, but we're looking for higher estimates of frequency. Again, you're breaking your session into equal intervals, such as a 10-minute session could be broken into 20 30-second intervals. And you record the behavior if it occurs at any time during the interval. It does not have to occur the entire interval. And then you count your number of occurrences or pluses and divide that by the number of intervals. So a student earning poor grades, or C's, is going off task during lessons. You break a 40-minute history lesson into 15-second intervals. Anytime the student looks out the window, mark a plus. Notice how this would have looked very different with whole interval recording, considering collecting 3 5-minute sessions at the beginning, middle, and end, rather than trying to record every 15 seconds across a 40-minute lesson. To get inter-observer agreement, you take the number of agreements and you divide by the total number of agreements and disagreements. Momentary time sampling also gives us an estimate of higher frequency behaviors, but these behaviors that occur with some duration. So it seems like a combination of whole interval and partial interval. These intervals are short enough to ensure responses of target behavior that are not missed frequently. So what you want to record is you break your session into equal intervals and you record at the end of each interval whether the behavior is occurring or not occurring. And then you divide the number of pluses by the number of intervals. This would apply to the same situation of the student earning poor grades for going off task. Just remember, target behaviors occur at least the length of the interval and frequently enough so that you can get that good estimate of duration and frequency. Your inter-observer agreement is going to be the number of agreements between two observers divided by the number of agreements and disagreements. That's the point-by-point method. Here we have percent correct and incorrect. What are the advantages of permanent products? Well, they're available to be analyzed. They can be on videotapes, audio tapes, paper and pencil, or word processing. It allows for analysis after with repeated review. The disadvantage is that you don't know why the student may perform better on one session to the next. Distractions, mistakes. Percentages most accurately reflect the changes when there are 100 or more opportunities. If you only have 5 opportunities and the student gets 4 out of 5 or only misses 1, that's already an 80%. Percent does not consider speed or fluency, and there may be an artificial floor or ceiling. But you take the number of correct responses and divide by the number of opportunities to respond. Perhaps math fractions. Some special considerations are those artificial floor and ceiling. And to get agreement, you just compare 2 grades, the number of agreements, divided by the number of agreements and disagreements. But let's get back to Taylor. Taylor's team must decide on a recording procedure. Frequency was one suggestion. However, the team decided that the hand flapping occurred at a high rate and would be very difficult to count. Another suggestion was whole or partial interval recording. The team considered these as well. However, because the intervention was going to include response interruption, whole interval would not be appropriate because an adult would likely stop her target behavior before an interval elapsed. At this point, the team was focusing on partial interval recording. Let's consider some time-based recording procedures. Duration recording should be used when the length of is the primary target behavior of concern. So you start a timer when the behavior begins and stop it when the behavior ends. You record that total duration and then the length of the session. That way you can get a percent of the session the behavior occurred. You take the time engaged in the behavior, then divide by the total time observed. You could use this for time on the computer or a tantrum. You can record frequency, percent duration, and average duration with all of the information you gather on the duration recording. And with inter-observer agreement, you have 2 observers record the time and you just divide the shorter time by the longer time. Lightning, if you're interested in the amount of time that elapses between signaling of a stimulus, or the school bell, for example, and the emission of a target behavior, or the bell ringer activity being started, you would be getting latency. This is an obvious example. because this latency recording is when you're interested in the amount of time that elapses between signaling of a stimulus and the emission of a target behavior. Start your timer when the antecedent stimulus begins or the instructions are given, and stop the timer when the behavior begins and record that time. So an example might be a client in a stressful marriage needs to reflect on possible action to be taken before actually taking action in a stressful situation, or thinking before acting. Does that sound familiar? So we're not always trying to decrease latency. Sometimes we want longer latency in the example of the stressful marriage. Look at these examples, and which recording method would be appropriate for each. Incorrectly pronounced words. Well, if you're limited by the opportunities given by the teacher, you would record percentage, the number correct out of the total opportunities. Homework assignments submitted. Well, probably you could just submit frequency. Just count the number of assignments, because each day would be the same amount of time. Correct math problems. Again, you only have so many opportunities because you only have so many problems, so a percentage would be the appropriate procedure. Items assembled. Well, if your time is consistent, frequency will be fine. But if your time varies from session to session, you would use rate to determine how many assembled per time period. For being on task, you need to be able to record the duration. And if you cannot see the beginning and the ending, duration recording could be difficult. So in that case, you would use momentary time sample recording to get an estimate of duration. Humming a tune? Perhaps duration could be used because you can hear the beginning and the end of that behavior. But uttering repeatedly, would probably be too much to count for frequency. Duration could work, but if they are a short duration, it could be difficult. So maybe momentary time sampling would be the most convenient and representative. Taylor's team, for the same reason they discarded the idea of using whole interval recording, because response interruption of her hand flapping would decrease the duration immediately, also declined the use of duration recording. It appeared that partial interval recording was the only possibility. However, several team members noted that partial interval recording often requires a recorder to do nothing but observe and record. They questioned if this was feasible, and if they limited the recording to only a few minutes each day, or at various points throughout the day, they would not capture the extent of her behavior or the impact of the intervention. Taylor's team arrived at a unique solution. They decided that they would use a frequency recording after all. Although counting the actual number of individual flaps of her hand would still be difficult, they decided they could record each episode of her hand flapping. Because it would be interrupted, each episode should be limited in length. This type of frequency recording could be used by each adult working with her throughout the day. The total frequency for hand flapping could then be recorded each day. So understanding the various methods of collecting data and recording behavior can help you find the most representative way to document a behavior. So think about this scenario, and when you make your proposal for collecting data, you will want to consider the most effective and efficient way to collect data and be able to describe how to collect that data. I thank you for your attention and hope you're having a wonderful day.